guys, my name is Cassandra Rawhise, and this is episode 2 of this Dyslexia podcast. And right now I have Dr. Dunbar on the podcast. So you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Megan Dunbar. I've been a licensed clinical psychologist here in Fairfax, Springfield. Since like 2013. I got licensed 2013.
Wow.
So almost 10 years now. I'm an adult with dyslexia.
Same. So, like, when you were younger in school, when did you find out that you were dyslexic?
My road was a little bumpy.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't officially diagnosed until I was an adult.
Okay.
I had obviously difficulties with reading in school, and spelling tests were impossible, right? So there were signs when I was probably around second grade.
Yeah.
I got evaluated at school, but I was able to pass because I had workarounds by then.
Yeah.
So I didn't score low enough on the testing to get screened for services. So I didn't get 504 plans or IEPs or anything. No.
Okay.
So my mom and dad, I got private tutoring, and I got small grouped for reading.
Oh, not that.
But not a lot of extra. I was general matriculated all the way through. I don't think I really leaned in on it until I was studying for licensure for my work. Okay. Until then, it was pretty clear that studying for the exam was really difficult, and doing that on my own and all the reading involved in that was really horrible and tedious, and getting through the exam was really hard, and I didn't have accommodations.
Oh.
And so that was a whole thing.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say, though, I always knew there was something, and it's definitely in my family tree. My cousins are dyslexic, my nephew's dyslexic, so it's in the gene pool for sure.
Right.
I didn't have official diagnosis until I was an adult.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The same thing happened to me where I was tested at the school and I worked around everything, and so it wasn't until a lot later, high school, where middle school I found out, and then I also got diagnosed with ADHD. Yeah. And so it's all together.
Yep. I think that's common for girls, actually, because girls don't tend to make as much of a fuss in the classroom.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? They're not as disruptive. They're not especially quiet, shy girls. Right. They get kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit, and then you're just suffering in silence. Yeah.
So you went to the American School of Psychology, right?
Yes.
And so what was that like?
Exciting, because I wanted to be a psychologist since high school, since the college process happened. So
where did that love of psychology or whatever kind of stem from?
Well, I don't know. I think my mom had a great skill of just reading people. She could just see through people. She's just very good at that. And I kind of hoped that I had a little bit of that skill, just naturally.
Yeah.
And I guess in my friend group, I was kind of the listener in the friend group. So that sort of spawned that. And my dad suggested that would be a good avenue for me. And I was like, yeah, I think that's probably
true. That's cool.
Yeah. So it kind of spun out from there.
Yeah. So, because you found out that you were dyslexic later on, was there an acceptance process, or did you? Okay.
Yeah. I think graduate school happened because I had something to prove. In a way.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have done graduate school or the doctoral program if I hadn't thought like I was like stupid or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My family, so my sister was a legacy at Syracuse, and so she's 2 years older than me.
Okay.
And so it was like hard really living in her shadow. She was very bright. She was like in honors and AP classes in high school, like. And so, you know, when I come around and it's like, oh, you're Samantha's sister. And it's like, oh, yeah. Don't expect much.
I know how that feels. My sister's like planning on going to law school and everything with a 4.0. And I'm just like, I probably will never achieve that. But I know, like, it's just like people with dyslexia, especially girls, like they feel this need to prove that they can do it. And like, they just push themselves to the breaking point.
Yeah. So I think there was definitely that part of the situation where I was like, no, you're not going to tell me I can't do this. I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But I think the other part of it was like, I couldn't see myself like working in like an office cubicle kind of environment. And like staring at spreadsheets all day, and like my brain just doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
Like I need that audio processing is really more my game, right? Because the reading is not so good, right? So I need a job I can talk to people, you know? Like
that's definitely a lot easier. It's also like so much more creative, like your mind, like every case is different. Like that seems really, really cool. So just like a little bit about what is dyslexia, because I've known for like 5 years, but I get different like definitions and stuff like that. So like, what's your interpretation?
So the research I've done, there's like, it's not just word sound decoding. There's lots of other elements to reading dysfunction in general. My nephew, for example, so he has the phonics issue, but he also struggles with like turning what he's reading into like a mental movie.
Okay.
You know, like that visualization process that happens when you're reading. Like he can't do all of that at the same time.
Right.
So he doesn't get context very well, right? So that is also an element of dyslexia. It's not just word sounds or like flipping letters, like the normal things that you would think of when someone says dyslexic, right? Like there's other elements there too. That I think are often, again, missed because you can't live in someone's brain and know that they're not doing that. And so if they're not communicating that to you, and especially like a little kid that doesn't know how to like use those kind of words and like know how to communicate easily, they're not gonna be able to say like, oh, I'm not visualizing that. I don't know what that is.
Right.
They can't tell you that, right? And so then you don't know what their struggle is, right? And why, like, okay, they have the words down, but they're still not getting the context correct. So like, what's that about, right? I think that kind of stuff, again, can get missed often. And it's subtle, right? But it gives you investment in what you're reading. And if you can't do all of that at once, like reading is so complicated, really.
It is,
then there's going to be problems there, right?
I mean, something that I learned that I found really interesting was my private tutor told me to read this book, The Dyslexia Empowerment Plan by Ben Foss. And he really talked about like how like written language wasn't as big as a thing as it is now. Like everything was speaking, like that's the way our brains are wired. And so now, like, I guess trying to go into a field of study where it's more like talking is definitely something I need to look for. So also, like, I know a lot of people like just look at like the weaknesses of dyslexia, but dyslexia is a really good strength as well. What do you think some strengths that dyslexics have?
One of the things that I say to the kids that I see for therapy, like one of the nice things about my job is like, now that I know that I've had this deficit and I've been living with it forever, and like my struggles with school, I can now pay that forward to the kids that I see, and like they can benefit from the wisdom, right? So one of the things that I say to kids is perseverance has been like my superpower.
Just keep going.
my mom was really great about that, like not letting me give up on things, not letting me think that I can't do it just because I have this issue, right? Like she never held me back that way at all.
Yeah.
She was like, you just need to find another way.
Yeah. Just work around it.
Just find another way. Yeah. So I think for me that's been a huge advantage. Because so like my siblings, so I have two siblings. My sister really struggled in college. Because she never learned how to study. She never had to.
Oh.
She was like naturally smart. She didn't have to study for tests. She always got good grades. She didn't have to work for it, right? And then when she got to college and she actually had to work for it,
then
those cracks started to show, right? And like college was really hard for her, right? And my brother, the same deal, right? Like he didn't have to study. He kind of coasted through high school. And when he got to college, it was a game changer, right? I already knew what to do, right? Because I had struggled already. So college was easy, because I was like, oh, I know how to study. This is fine. I know what to do. I can make flashcards. I can, whatever. Like I know what I need to do here. This is not a big deal. And so I didn't have any problems as an undergrad at all, because I had struggled already. And figured those things out ahead of time, right? Whereas I feel like kids who are like, that don't have to struggle, right? They don't have those issues, right? Then like college is like a pretty rude awakening. Because you actually have to read and you have to like study and like do the things that,
So like speaking of college, what like, because you didn't have really any accommodations, so how did you like work around all that stuff?
So looking back on it, it's funny because I feel like I gave myself accommodations without realizing it. So I got really good at like organizing my time, because I knew like certain things was going to take me longer. Right. Like if I had a big like paper I had to write or something like that, I knew I had to spend the extra time on it because it was going to take me longer. I wasn't going to be able to do the all-nighter and just get it done in one day. Like there's no way that was going to happen. Classes that like required a lot of memorizing, because I don't do well with like lists. Lists are like really terrible.
Same.
Like I would take those classes over the summer so that the time was a little condensed and I was doing it every day, so I'd have the benefit of repetition and like the constancy of that, right? So I like did those things just on my own without like any formal so like I found workarounds so that I could go like, okay, this class is going to be a lot of lists and memorizing, so I should probably take this class over the summer because it'll be easier. Or like I know this paper's due on this day and this paper's due like the next day, so I better start because I'm not going to be able to do both of these things at the same time, right? Like I just knew myself well enough by then to like figure out how to make it work.
That's really, really good.
When I was in high school and we had to do like Shakespeare and like the Odyssey, like Old English was not my friend.
No.
So in that time, like my dad would sit and read them to me. And we would go over it together. Like I was lucky enough to have that kind of support at home, where like my parents were able to kind of pick the load up a little bit. Whereas not everybody has that.
I know some of my friends who are dyslexic, their parents, they kind of just go, we'll just work harder. It like that makes no sense, you know. But just like I remember when my dad was little, he would read to me. I would be able to see the story. But if I were to do it myself, I see nothing. I'm just reading.
The mechanics of it takes over, right? And then you can't really listen.
Exactly.
So we did those kinds of things a lot. And so when I got to college, I found audiobooks, and that was also like a game changer. Like, oh, thank God.
I know, like, because I hated reading, and so now I kind of, because I found audiobooks, now I can see the story, and I like reading. If I find what I like. The books that they give me in school, not so much, but like other stuff I like.
Well, so my problem with school really is that like there's such a hard focus on phonics, right? And so if you have difficulties with word sound decoding, like there's no amount of like learning there that's going to help you.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
so I can't, like, I'm not getting anything out of that
Exactly.
at all, right?
Yeah.
So, like, how do you reach a kid who's struggling there and, like, not go just, well, just sound it out. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to do that no matter how hard I try it.
Exactly.
Like, I'm never winning a spelling bee. Like, there's got to be another way.
Yeah. So, like, because you work with kids, what are, like, signs, like, warning signs when, like, kids are younger? What should you tell parents to look for?
So, in my practice, I have gotten a little frustrated with the, like, automatic ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes it's this sort of stuff. It's not necessarily an attention problem.
Right.
It's this kid is struggling with reading, and so they're distracted at school.
Yeah.
Because reading is such a pervasive skill, right? You need it for everything. You need it for reading class, obviously, English class. You need it for social studies, science, right? Everything, math, right? Because word problems, right? So, like, if a kid is struggling with reading, they're gonna check out. Because they don't want to do it. Nobody wants to do something they're not good at. Right?
Yeah.
And they can't, like, kids don't communicate like that.
Yeah.
They're not going to be like, I'm embarrassed because I can't read, right? Like, no kid talks like that, right? So sometimes when parents come in and they say, like, my kid's has an attention issue, or the teacher's reporting that sort of stuff, I'm going to hesitate to say that I think that's ADHD for sure until we really screen it out and, like, check that. Because I think sometimes, like, I'm not saying that I don't think there's an attention issue, but it could be 100 things. There's a lot of reasons for kids having attention deficits, right? It's not necessarily ADHD.
Yeah.
But it's become such a catch-all,
Yeah.
right? And so because of that, like, the label's lost power.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I find that a little frustrating, frankly, as a mental health provider. So I'm going to screen that out and make sure that there's no other things happening there.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, kids get distracted in school for a lot of reasons.
So what do you know about, like, masking dyslexia? Because that was still something I deal with, like, in the IEP meetings. They're just like, you don't need help, you're doing so well, but that's just because I'm working 50 times harder than the average student. Because I don't want to fail.
Right.
So, how would you, like, explain that to a parent?
I think with that sort of stuff, like, no kid likes to feel stupid. Right? And kids know they have limited power, right? That's the other thing, right? So they know if they come home with bad grades, they're going to get in trouble. They're going to lose privileges. Right? Because that's how that goes. Right? So kids who are reasonably intelligent are going to figure out how to work around that, right? And they're not going to draw a lot of attention to themselves, right? They're going to pass that as much as they can. And I think it's easier for kids who are reasonably intelligent to figure out workarounds. And so that was my issue, right? Like, I scored really high on the IQ tests and stuff. And so I wasn't hitting the benchmarks to like meet the services benchmarks, right? And that happened also with the licensing exam because I do this for a living now. I can't take an IQ test.
Oh, that's weird.
Because I give it, so I know the answers, right? So it's not like I said, you're not going to get a real number, right? Okay. So I would have to take something super obscure that, like, no one uses, that, like, isn't going to qualify on the list of possible tests that are, like, reasonable for accommodations, right? So it's impossible.
Right.
All right.
I mean, speaking of, like, I guess IQ and dyslexia, like, how does that correlate? Because that's, like, really weird, I guess.
So the way I work that out, like, as a professional, right? Like, so there's a difference between, like, verbal comprehension and, like, phonics skills, word sound skills, right? Yeah. Like, someone can have a huge vocabulary, right, and know a lot of words. Yes. Because, again, they're intelligent. They can sight read pretty easily, but that doesn't mean they can spell. That's a totally different skill.
That's literally what I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah, it's a totally different skill. And so, yeah, so like kids who are smart, right, can speed read because their processing speed is fast enough, and they just skip over the words they can't sound out, right? And they can move fast enough that they can hold on to context and it's not noticed, right? So I would say that's a form of masking, too, where like your other skills are compensating so then no one notices. Right. And then you can pass a lot easier, right? Because the other thing is, at least for myself, right? Like school is such a microcosm, right? Like, you don't want to stand out at all,
right?
You know, you don't want to be the kid who's being pulled out because then you're different and that's bad. You know, so it's easier to figure out how to blend in. So I think a lot of kids do that masking. Because it's just safer.
It's safer, and honestly, like just thinking about it, that makes you feel like how intelligent these kids really are. Like that's crazy that we just
like it's just adapting, right? Like it's easy to just, it's like, that's clever that you figured that out all on your own. Like it's interesting that your body can do that it just sort of figures it out.
It's like survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
So at your practice, who do you mainly like work with, or is it like a whole variety?
So my practice is generalized. So I see kids, I see adults, I see teens, I see anyone who walks in the door. But I would say the majority of my caseload is kids and teens.
Okay.
I tend to do well with 8-year-old boys with ADHD. We play a lot of Legos in my office.
Fun. So I remember like when I went into testing, I didn't know what to expect, and that kind of freaked me out. So what would you have parents like tell their kids to know what to expect?
So the testing process, I feel like, is a lot more complicated than most people think. It's not like you're going to go in for an hour and you're going to be done.
No.
It's a lot longer than that. And for myself, I feel like the worst kind of feedback you can get from a doctor is I don't know. Because then it's like, okay, I did all of this and you still have no idea. Like that's not really comforting, right? So I want to I'm going to kick over every rock I can think of, right? So I'm going to check everything I can think of to kind of make sure we have a broad spectrum of what's going on, where the strengths and weaknesses are, right? So when I see kids, I tell them that, right? That we're like, this is a long process and it's not going to be fun. Sorry.
It's like mentally draining.
That's the other thing, right? Like you're sitting one-to-one with somebody doing mental exercise for several hours, right? Like it's tiring. It's, some parts are going to be easy, some parts are not. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Right? Like that's just normal people, right? So, like don't worry if it's hard for you. Like everybody is going to have places where it's hard and other places where they're cruising along and it's fine, right?
I remember when I was taking, because I took like the IE all psych eval twice. Once when I was little and 2 years ago. And I just, sometimes you can't do it. And I'm just like, oh my God, I feel so stupid.
Which, like the anxiety just kicks up, right? The other thing that I tend to tell kids is it's okay to say I don't know. Because I think some kids, like you ask them a question and they feel like they have to have an answer. And if you don't know, you don't know. It's okay, right? Like everybody's going to hit a threshold at some point. And that's supposed to happen.
Right. You're not infinite. So like, just so parents know, like what are like the tests that you use to like find dyslexia?
Right. So we have to sort of live in the bubble of like what the schools will accept in some ways, right? So I have some decision-making power, but in some ways I have to kind of live in, because if we're going to then send that to school for accommodations, it has to be something that they're going to accept as valid, legitimate, whatever. So the schools require like gaps between your cognitive skills and your academic skills, right? They require a certain level of distance between those two things, right? For it to be an actual deficit. What's happened because of COVID, right? Like, because everybody's struggling now, everybody's behind. Schools have gotten a little bit more prickly about those gaps. Because they're like, well, we can't give services to everybody.
Right.
Everybody's behind. And in my mind, I'm like, well, if this kid is really dyslexic, this would have been here regardless of COVID.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't care.
Yeah.
So we have to do IQ for like cognitive processing, right? But then the problem with achievement testing and doing it privately, like outside of school, is that insurance companies don't reimburse it because it's not a medical need.
Which is ridiculous.
What can you do, right? This is the environment we live in.
Yeah.
So then parents have to pay out of pocket for it, which is like not everybody has those sort of resources, right? So so I try to like tell parents, like, okay, so we can do this part of it, and then we can send you to the school, and the school can do it for free.
Okay. Yeah.
If that's going to be an issue. Now, a lot of parents that I've been running into now, like post-COVID, have been a little wary about the school system and don't want to trust the school system.
Yeah.
Which is fine, right? But it does extend the time for the testing process then, because then we're doing the achievement testing too. So then it takes longer, but then you have one document that has everything.
Exactly.
Which is sometimes nicer, right? And then kids not being pulled out of class for testing, and the eligibility process can go a little smoother because everything's done already.
Exactly.
So parents sometimes prefer that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more costly that way, right? Because we can't run it through the insurance company.
Yeah.
And it takes longer because then we're adding time.
Yeah.
But there are benefits to doing that.
Yeah, definitely privately. I feel like, I don't want to come up with any allegations or anything, but like, because they said I had a processing disorder, they never specified it as dyslexia. So because they never said the word dyslexia, I never got the proper remediation that I needed. And so now I'm stuck in this like cycle of, I'm trying to get remediation, I'm trying to get the county to pay for it. It's just a mess. But I'm really working on like advocating for myself. I think that's a really big thing that a kid learns to do when you're in this position.
Yeah. Learning workarounds for sure.
Yeah. So speaking of advocating, how should you like advocate? Do you like advocate for your clients in schools, or you go into IEP meetings?
I have,
yes. Oh, you have? Is it like, because I hate IEP meetings. They drive me nuts.
They're super intimidating, especially if you don't have any sense of what goes on and what the process is like, because it does feel like you're being sort of talked at.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and you're not listened to at all.
Yeah. And I get that, like, the school system has a certain process that they need to do, and that's like the players don't necessarily have control over that.
Right.
So I get that in some sense, but I also get that, like, there's folks like, it sounds like you and me, who kind of like fall right in the border place where it's like, I can manage, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Right. And so what do you do with that sort of kid? Right. So that they're feeling supported and like they're like learning is being nurtured.
Yeah.
Without it feeling like such a chore, and it's just like horrible, and it's like almost torture. Right. I like that group is a tough group.
Yeah.
Right. That like middle of the road group.
Yeah. I think like if you hit it when you're young, that's really, really good. But then if you're like at my age, you kind of either have to like really, really fight for it.
Yeah.
If your family has the money to pay for a tutor, that's great.
Right.
But if not, then you kind of have to go into a field of study that you like really are passionate about, which is like an advantage because our brains are so creative and we're always thinking out of the box. And that's like a big.
Well, and it's not just like tutoring. Like I would say dyslexic kids need like very specific type of tutoring.
You have a therapy.
Well, and again, my nephew, he goes to private school because his dyslexia was just like really like a lot worse than mine.
Yeah.
And he does like the reading structure program that he does has like a sensory grounding element to it. So there's like rhythm and he's tapping and he's like using his other skills to like help him move through the word sounds.
Yeah.
So it's not just phonics.
Right.
Right. There's other elements being brought in to like make that easier for him. He's really like you need to like the sight reading becomes really important, right? Because you need to be able to skim and read faster, right? So how do you teach a kid how to sight read? They just have to memorize words.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's his game, right? He just has like word lists that he has to memorize and like he has this like tapping thing that he does when he reads because he needs the rhythm to help him, right? And so there are other things you can do, but the problem is the public schools don't have the energy and the space to accommodate those sort of things, right? And so then they're just stuck with word sounds and that's it, right? And so then like you're still getting lost,
right?
So yeah, so I like there like I said, there are workarounds, and it's not just any kind of tutoring is going to be enough.
Yeah, it's got to be like specific. I did just words, and that it was not frequent enough.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any frequency with that. But then I'm doing sounds and syllables, and that's definitely helped a lot.
Yeah, like there has to be a specific, like again, based on your type of dyslexia and like what strengths and weaknesses you have and how can you integrate the strengths in with what's going on so that you can like lift up the weaknesses a little bit, right? Like it can't be just a cookie cutter thing.
Yeah. I know for me, like I cannot spell at all.
Oh yeah, me neither.
But I have like the vocab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I know what the words are, but don't ask me to spell them.
Yeah, it's not gonna happen. I think like raising a kid who has dyslexia, especially if they're like it's later on in the game, is hard. And because you're a psychologist, how would you like help the parent like raise their kids to become the best kid they can be?
So again, I was lucky to have supportive parents. So, but I would say my mom and I had a rough go for a while because I think she just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
She had really high expectations. So, for example, when I would come home with my like C- on my spelling test, right? She'd be like, Megan, I don't know how you're not getting 100 on the spelling test. You know what's going to be on it. You've studied these words all week.
Right.
Like, how do you not, like, knock this out?
Yeah.
And I just look at her in my, like, 8-year-old self, and I'm just like, right? Now, you could say that's mean. And in a way, like, it was harsh for sure. I'm not going to dispute that. And I don't think my mom would either. But, like, she didn't understand.
Right.
Like, she didn't know. Like that didn't make sense to her. Like she could see me sitting there studying those words all week.
Yeah.
She could see me drilling all week, right? And then like I come home and I still like I can't make an A on this test. Like how is that happening?
Yeah.
Right? There's got to be something getting in the way. And so like she just couldn't like figure that out, right? Now my dad was better about it because I think he lined up on what was going on a little quicker. He was just really patient. So like I don't know your experience, but like school was rough for me. Like I came home crying a lot.
Yes.
And we just talked about it. Like what happened, what can we do? And that's how I ended up in tutoring, I think, basically, because I just was like so frustrated.
Yeah.
So patience, I would say, is the important thing for parents because like you're gonna reach this threshold where like there was no way I was gonna make an A on those spelling tests.
Right.
Like that wasn't happening. Right. Like just lean in on that reality. Right. Like, it's okay. You know, like I'm not gonna die because I can't get an A on a spelling test, right? Like, it's fine. You know? Yeah. The other thing is, like I said, my dad was very patient. Like, he sat and read to me. Mm-hmm. Like, he didn't have to do that.
Right. Yeah.
You know, he would sit and he would read and he'd be like, okay, so what was that part about? And I would be like, right. Yeah. Like, we would go over it together. Like, he was super patient. Mm-hmm. Which was very kind. Yeah. Like, he didn't need to do that. Now, okay, he's like, you would hope a parent would be able to like go to bat for their kid like that. Mm-hmm. The other thing I will say is, like, for the kids who sit in that middle place where they don't quite meet like the standard for services, right? Like, that's a hard place for a parent, right? Because, like, how hard do you want to fight for your kid, right? And how exhausting that process is for a parent. Yeah. To have to keep battling against the school, right? Like, at a certain point, like, when do you just give up and pull your kid out and like do something else?
Yeah, I watched my mom go through that with me for a long time, and it was really, really hard.
Yeah, really hard. Like, because, like, as a parent, right, like, you care so much. You don't want to see your kids suffering. Right. But, like, you don't know how to help them at the same time.
You're, like, backed in a corner if you don't have the funds.
Yeah. Or, you know, your kid, again, like, so, you know, dyslexia is a language deficit, right? So, like, communication is going to be a problem. Yeah. Right? So you can't expect the kid necessarily to be able to say, like, this is hard for me. Yeah. They can't communicate anyway, right? They're not good at it. That's not their strength area. Yeah. So like, why is this happening? Like, my mom asking me, like, why can't you get an A on the spelling test? Like, I don't have an answer for that. Right. Like, as an adult, I understand now, right? But, like, at the time, like, I can't answer that question, right? And so, like, why are you asking me a question like this? Yeah. Like, I don't know, right? Like, so like, how do you communicate with your kid and let them know it's okay? Yeah. You know?
I now, like, know when I'm now in high school and I'm still very hard on myself. I want the A, and I come home and I get like an 80 something, and I'm not happy with that, and they're just like, that's great. And my mom, she doesn't care. If I fail, that's okay. She only cares if I try. Yeah, and that's because she sees how hard I work.
Yeah, it's not lack of effort, for sure.
No, definitely not. So, like, in your opinion, do you think the public school system is, like, good with people with dyslexia?
Well, I think there's been some positive growth over the years, but I think for the most part, there's not been a lot of change, frankly, or enough change. Yeah. And I guess I was sort of hoping that with COVID and, like, the, like, shutdown of the school system and, like, how that happened, like, this would have been an opportunity to really, like, overhaul what we're doing and, like, regroup a little bit. But it doesn't seem to be that has not happened.
Yeah, I know, like, Carrie Delaney passed a law, my mom told me about, where they, like, do you know about that? Maybe you can explain it better than I can.
So I think there's been some change to, like, how learning disabilities are being included in, like, the Americans for Disabilities Act. And there's been some change in terms of how that impacts then, like, how adults engage in the workforce as a learning disabled adult. Yeah. So that's great. But I also feel like kids aren't getting nearly enough support in school. No. And that's been true since I was in school. Yeah. Like, that hasn't changed at all. Right. Because, like, we're still stuck in this sort of phonics system that doesn't work for everybody. And I get that, like, you can't cater to every single learning style. Yeah. That's just too much for a teacher, right? Yeah. Teachers are already, like, struggling enough. Yeah. Like, we don't need to add to their burden. But I think where growth has been really positive is, like, after school, because there used to be that there's, like, once you're out of school, there really isn't anything. Right. Right. Like, you just go into the workforce and that's it. Right. But I think it seems like employers are being a little bit more accommodating, which is great.
Yeah.
Because then there's more options.
Yeah.
Really. But the downside is like, why did it take so long for that to happen?
Yeah.
and kids are still struggling, right, in the meantime, right? Yeah. So like that's not necessarily the fix-all. So there's also been some change to like how the IEP process is working post-COVID, which some of it I get because again, like you can't, like everybody's behind.
Right.
So like, what do you do about that, right? But at the same token, like they've made it harder to jump through all the hoops, and for parents who are just desperate to get their kids services, right? Like that just becomes like exhausting.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't know how the system works and you don't know where you can advocate and where you can't, and like where the lanes are, right? And like what the laws are. Because the other thing that I know is sometimes schools will like kind of, I don't want to say like make up stuff, but they'll say things that really aren't 100% true.
Yeah.
Like I can't tell you how many parents have come into my office and said like the school has diagnosed their kid with ADHD. And that kind of stuff always makes me cringe because like technically the school is not a clinical setting. They can't do that. So that's not true.
Right.
They may have hinted at it, but like they can't diagnose your kid.
Yeah.
Or one instance, one kid that I was testing, their parent was told that the school wouldn't test for learning disabilities and accommodations because like they were doing too well in school, and that's just like again not really appropriate. So there's all these things that the schools do to kind of like work or delay or push back, and again sometimes I get it, right? Like they're short staffed. There's like being a school teacher is hard right now, right? You can't like what like 50% of students in a classroom have an IEP, right? Like it's just a lot, right? So in some ways I understand. But like if that's true, if like 50% of kids in classrooms have IEPs, then like maybe the system isn't good.
Yeah, right? Like something's not working.
Right? Like maybe we need to be looking at that.
Definitely.
Like that feels like a lot. Like that many kids should not need accommodation. No. So like what is happening here then?
Yeah, it's just it's so stressful too. I know a lot of kids have accommodations just like extra time and stuff like that because they're just so anxious.
Yeah.
You know, they see a test come in front of them and they just like bust out in tears.
Right.
And like it should not be like that at all.
Yeah. Like why are we so intense about school? Like shouldn't school be like fun a little bit?
Yeah.
Right? Like shouldn't we be excited about learning?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful that change is coming. But my concern is that like especially like here in this area, like Fairfax County has such a reputation for being like top rated schools,
like overachievers.
And I you know maybe I'm getting a skewed perspective because I see only the kids who are struggling really. But it does like I've done classroom observations and like I've been inside those schools. I've been at IEP meetings, and I'm struggling to see what's so great about these schools, frankly.
Yeah, no.
They don't seem like any better than any other school.
No.
Like some of the classrooms feel very chaotic, and for somebody who like is learning disabled or has some sort of sensory processing delay or speed issue or something, like you're surrounded by bulletin boards with like all kinds of colors and like chaos, and like people are getting up in the middle of class and walking around, right? Like there's talking all the time, nobody's raising their hand, right? Like it's just like I don't know how you can learn in an environment like that if you have any sensitivities at all.
I feel like I remember like when I was younger, third grade, like we would all like raise our hand and stuff like that. We'd be like, you don't see that anymore.
It feels like a madhouse. Like I don't know how learning happens in an environment like that. It just like it makes me uncomfortable, and I'm not even trying to learn anything. I'm just there to observe, right?
These poor teachers, man.
Yeah. So I don't know how you fix that. But it just feels like the environment is just really intense. And yeah, again, for anybody who's struggling like at all, with like sensory processing or reading or things that's just a very difficult environment to like feel like positive about learning whatever it is that's happening. Like I just it makes me concerned for kids like moving into adulthood. Like if that's your expectation of what like a workspace is supposed to be, like yikes.
Yeah, that's good. Also, like looking back when you said about the ADHD and they like 100% true, like they might not have ADHD or whatever. Like maybe did they just do that so it's like if you do have ADHD, you can just take a pill and they're done.
Yeah.
And then, but if they were to have dyslexia, that's a whole other ballgame.
Right.
With like remediation and everything like that.
Yeah. And like, okay, let's say you give a kid who's having an attention issue a stimulant, right? Because that's the go-to for ADHD, right? Like if that kid also has anxiety, like a stimulant's going to rev your heart rate.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to like induce anxiety.
Yeah.
So like how is that helpful?
Right.
You know what I mean? Right? So you're not actually fixing the problem.
Right.
Which is why I have gotten a little gatekeepy about like ADHD diagnoses in general. Cause I just like I don't see how that helps anybody. And there's been a lot of new research out just recently, the last couple of months out of the UK about like stimulant medication for kids who don't have ADHD. Is it actually effective or not? And turns out not.
Okay.
So like all these kids who like sell pills and stuff to each other, right? Like
the side streets.
Right. Like there's no benefit to doing.
Nothing.
Yeah, it's really not affecting anything. And like and so then like if you've misdiagnosed this kid and you're going to put them on a stimulant, it's going to do nothing.
Right.
And so you're just inducing anxiety.
Yeah.
That's it.
I know, I guess for me that reaffirmed it then because I was like through the roof anxious. I started taking stimulants and I just slowed down. Like I can focus now.
Well, so the other caveat for me is the kids who present impulsive are sometimes compulsive, really, because they look really similar, right? And so, but like parents and adults don't think about kids with obsessive compulsive disorder, right? Like that doesn't feel like a thing a kid could have. But I find that it's a lot more common than I think people think it is. Kids get really obsessive and anxious. A lot. And it looks a lot like ADHD, but it is not ADHD, right?
They feel like they need to control things.
Yeah, there's a little bit more urgency with a compulsion than there is with impulsivity. And so sometimes that subtlety gets missed, right? And so then it's presented like ADHD. But it's really, this is a super like obsessive kid. So I try to screen for that sort of stuff because I don't like, I want to make sure we're treating the thing that is happening.
I think what I did to get tested for ADHD is like start with a T. It was like I sat at a screen and I clicked the button with the little thing. And then we get the report back and she goes, yeah, she's got it pretty bad. And so I was like, okay. Yeah, because at this time I was really, really sick. Like my body was like, I was getting sick a lot. I got sinus infections. I had migraines. And then I started taking the stimulant. And within 2 weeks, didn't get a migraine, didn't get a sinus infection. And it's been a year like that now. So it's like, I know this is. But it's very, like, you really got to look into
You got to dig for it, right? And the thing about ADHD is there's no, like, one test that tells you, yes, this is what it is. Like, you kind of have to piece it together for a bunch of different stuff. Like, kids with learning disabilities and attention deficits often have trouble with, like, executive functions. Like, switching their attention, inhibiting right? Managing, organizing, multitasking, that sort of stuff. So we're going to check those things, right? So if you're doing well at that, then that's a sign that the attention is fine, right? If you're not, then maybe there's something weird happening there.
I know, like, for girls, what I did is I, like, hid it. So I worked really, really hard because I wrote lists of everything I had to do that day. And I was just like, bam, 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 bam. Because before, when I was younger, I would lose all my stuff, like, all the time. And so then I started getting really anxious, and I created these workarounds to, like, not fix the ADHD, but, like,
accommodate yourself. Yeah.
And that's why it, like, went on for so long. So.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, you're just being organized, right? But it's like, no,
like, it was to
not really.
It was to the point where, like, I would have to write sticky notes every day of what I needed to do, which it was a lot.
So my dyslexia, I can't do lists. So I tell this story a lot to my patients. So one time my dad and I were at the grocery store, and so we split the list, and he's like, okay, you take this half the list, I'll do this half the list, we'll meet at checkout. I said, all right. So I go and I get all the things, and I meet him at the checkout, and he's like, Megan, you didn't get everything. And I'm like, yes, I did. See? And he's like, there's quantities here. And like, they didn't exist until he pointed at them. Like, they were invisible to my eyes till he pointed at them. And I was just like, and then, like, and then your heart sinks, right? Because you're just like, I messed up, right? And, like, you just feel like, man, like, I didn't see it, like, it didn't exist. Like, it was invisible to my eyes until he pointed at it, right? And he goes, Megan, this is why you don't do well on standardized tests. And I was like, yeah, that's true. I spelled my name wrong on the SAT.
Really?
True story, yeah. Like, I bubbled my name incorrectly.
Oh, that makes sense.
So I didn't get my scores back right away because they had to figure out who this person was who spelled their name wrong.
Oh my gosh.
So, like, that's how I know, right? Like who does that? Who spells their name wrong? But, like, my eyes got weird on the bubble sheet.
I hate those things.
So I bubbled in the wrong letters, right? And so, I
always gotta double check those things. I hate Scantron.
Yeah, so, like, that kind of stuff I struggle with. DMV is just the worst as an adult now. Like, anytime I have to go to DMV for, like, updating my driver's license or changing my address or things like that, right? Like, I know I'm gonna have to go at least 3 times. Because I have to deal with the list because I need to bring like a proof of residency. I have to have all these documents, right? And I think I have all of them, right? And I get there and I'm missing like 2, and then I have to go back, right?
Yeah, the same thing happened to me.
I can't handle lists because I skip. Like, my eyes don't track. Like, I skip things and I move around. And so I don't see all the things on the list. The other place, like that sort of stuff, is like, like, anything that has a list, I cannot do. I struggle with time as well. So if somebody asks me what time it is, I won't give them the hour. I'll be like, oh, it's 45. And I can, like, feel myself doing it, but I can't stop myself from doing it. Like, I know I'm doing it, but it comes out anyway. You know what I mean? Like I skip over that sort of stuff. The other place, so in high school, my high school required you to take typing for like graduate. It was like a graduation requirement. So everybody had to take typing class. And we took typing on like electric like typewriters. So I actually had a piece of paper. It wasn't like a screen, right?
That's crazy.
So we had to like copy like business letters and things like that.
No.
And so I'd sit there and right. But I would type the same line like 5 times.
No.
Because I couldn't slide down to get to, like, my eyes didn't track down. And it's a piece of paper, so now I have to start over. I can't just edit, right?
No.
It's not a screen.
Yeah.
So that class was hard when it didn't need to be.
Right.
Right? It's like those kind of places where, like, like I needed extra time, right?
Yeah.
And accommodations. So I like made a little bookmark so that I could.
Yeah. That's smart.
And like, yeah, that class didn't need to be as hard as it was, right? But it was because I couldn't, like, my eyes couldn't do it, you know, like I couldn't organize myself to coordinate my fingers with reading the, like,
the two things are difficult. I know sometimes, like, even with like driving, you get lost all the time. Like, I'll be driving, especially if it's late at night and I'm tired. Miss the exit 50 times. Right. It's really difficult. I remember just last week, my friend says you need to go right, and I go okay, and I go left.
I've done that before too.
And so, and I'm just like, well, what did I just do? Like, I don't think I did anything wrong.
Yeah. So it's like, it's those kind of places where, like, you wouldn't think it's like a big deal. Like, again, like DMV, right? Like I'm like, oh, I have to go renew my driver's license. No. And my friend's like, oh yeah, that shouldn't take you that long. And I'm like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, like, bothers me, right? Where, like, when people get dismissive about those sort of things, because it's like, you don't understand how, like, my brain doesn't, like, do these sort of tasks well, just so you know.
Yeah.
Like, okay, it's easy for you, great, but that's not everybody. And so, yeah, so, like, that kind of stuff. Or, like, if I have to write emails or something at work, like, I'll spend 45 minutes on, like, a two-sentence email, right? Like, because I'm, like, going to obsessively proofread.
Right.
And I'm still going to miss stuff.
Yeah. It's just,
I can't.
It's inevitable.
Like, I can't do it well enough. Like, it's graduate school, but that was especially difficult. So, like, anytime we had to do, like, peer review article, like, summaries or anything like that, I would always get, like, APA form, like, you know, for the, like, bibliography part, because, like, I'd be, like, trying to figure out where the periods go. And, like, I just couldn't get it right every time. Like, I just...
Yeah, is punctuation, like, a hard thing for
Like,
you?
it didn't matter how many times I had done it before correctly. Like, it was still going to be, like, a battle.
Yeah, that's difficult.
Yeah,
I can't do any, like, punctuation like that.
Yeah.
Really difficult for me.
Yeah. And I, like, my other beef with, like, school is because the schools around here have kind of stopped doing spelling as a, like, a class.
Yeah.
For, like, the elementary kids.
Yeah.
Like, because it's like, oh, well, they're spell checks, so kids will figure it out.
Right.
I know for myself, like, I have put words into spell check, and they, you know, I get the little red line, and so then I go, like, Google search it, because that's the backup option, right? And I get results not found, right?
Oh god.
Like, it's spelled so badly that like, Google can't even find it.
Oh my god.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, you still have to understand some things in order to use spell check.
Yeah. That's, like, what happened to me during COVID, because, you know, you would only use the laptop, and I'm just like, I'm great at spelling. And then I get back to school, and everything's on paper, and then I'm just like, this looks like a third grader.
Like, I don't, yeah. So, like, it's those places where the extra time becomes valuable.
Yeah. Right?
Because, like, I know, like I said, like, I know it's going to take me at least 3 attempts to do anything but the DMV or, like, things like that.
Yeah.
Like, when I went to get a passport, right, that took me a few attempts too, because anything that requires a list, I'm going to struggle. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
If it has a list, I'm not going to do well with it. So, like, that sort of stuff becomes challenging in a school environment to, like, communicate to a parent, because they're going to continue to do, like, linear outlines.
Yeah.
They're going to continue to make kids write things down in list formats and bullet and things like that, because then it's like, we're taking away the grammar, because you're just going to you can just bullet, it's easier. But that's not necessarily easier.
Right. Yeah. It's
So, like, what are the other options, right? And I don't know that kids always have access to alternative options to, like, things like linear outlines and things like that. I had to get that through private tutoring.
Oh, okay. So
what school didn't offer.
So what does that kind of, like, look like, linear outlines?
So that's, like, where you have, like, paragraph 1, indent, and then you have the little things, and then like subheadings, and then it's like, you know,
Okay.
kind of lined up and tabbed in, right?
Okay.
I don't, my brain does not work like that.
Oh, okay.
I don't have that linear process
Oh,
happening,
okay.
right?
I see.
Like, and I find that dyslexic people who don't just have the phonics issue, but they also have the thing, like the eye tracking
Yeah.
and that sort of spatial organization stuff, can't do lists and outlines like that.
Yeah.
So I do, like, if I have to take notes in a session or something like that, I have stuff everywhere. Like, I don't use the lines on the paper at all.
It's difficult, like, because I still have like really, really bad handwriting, like, because I want to like make it look good, but then I'm just really, really slow, and then the class is ahead of me, and so then it just looks like a mess.
Right. So yeah, so I move kind of in a circle. That works for me, so I can kind of feel a flow around it, and I don't like I wrote it, so I know what the process is, and like how things got written down in the sequence, right? If anyone else looked at it, it would look like a mess.
Right.
The other thing that I tend to tell parents in terms of like what things they can do to help their kid is color coding.
Yeah.
Again, for kids who have the eye, like the spatial awareness parts of dyslexia, right? Like color coding is really helpful.
Okay.
Because like I remember like thinking like in my classes, I'd be like, all right, that was the purple section of my notes. Like what did it say? It's easier for me to access that stuff than like what was written there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was super helpful, like color coding things or like setting it to a rhythm, like making it musical. Also, like taking the linear process, like the sequencing parts of it away, right? Because like if you have spatial orientation stuff, like those kinds of things are just not helpful.
I kind of like fit myself in this mold where I kind of punch through where I'm just like, I'm gonna make it look like everybody else. Like that's why that looks like that. So
and that's the thing, you want to fit in, right, as a young person, right? And so you don't want to come in with your paper like all circled and like have a web outline, because that's different, right? And that makes you weird, right? It makes you a target for bullying, because then kids like ask like, why does your paper look like that? And they give you the stink face, right? Like you're weird or something. And like one of the things that I tell kids, I'm like, look, you don't owe anybody any explanation. So like, do what works for you. And if people have questions, answer them, don't answer them, that's up to you.
Yeah, that's something that I'm still working on. It's like hard for me, but like I think that's all part of the acceptance part.
So. Like, don't worry about it, right? Like if you need extra time, that's your business. No one needs to know why.
Right.
You don't owe anyone an explanation.
Yeah.
Now, if they're curious and you trust them and you want to educate somebody on a thing, go for it.
Yeah.
Right? But if there's fear that like, you know, offering information becomes a target for bullying and I don't want to expose myself to that, then you don't have to answer just because someone asked you something.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
That's really important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I learned a lot of new stuff.
All right. Great to be here.